I'm delighted to introduce my friend and vicar, Sam Wells. Sam is the vicar of St Martin in the Fields and a well-known preacher, pastor, writer, broadcaster and theologian who served as a Church of England parish priest for 21 years and also spent 7 years in North Carolina as Dean of Duke University Chapel. Sam is also visiting professor of Christian ethics at King's College London. He's published 40 books, including studies in Christian ethics and explorations of liturgy, preaching, faith, and mission. His most recent book is A Cross in the Heart of God. Sam is going to lead us in a session of godly play. Godly play is originally a form of children's catechesis in the Montessori tradition. Sam adapts it for use with adults as a way of entering into a story through wondering, a form of speech that's neither a question nor a statement, but an invitation to further exploration. Today's passage is 1 Samuel 3, 1-20. A bit later, Sam will invite us to join in wonderings. If you'd like to speak or sign your wondering, please use the raise hand function, found at the bottom of your screen on the reactions menu, so reactions and then raise hand. Sam will invite you to unmute. Or if you'd like to add your wondering in the chat, I'll read them out. Thank you, Sam.
Well, very great to be with you, very great honour to be with you, and I've really cherished everything that's been shared this morning. As Fiona said, there'll be 4 parts to what we do together in the next half hour or so. I'll tell a story, I'll wonder about the story, I'll invite you to wonder about the story, and then I'll put the story away in a prayerful manner. So I'm going to start by telling the story. Here is one of the stories about the people of God. When the people of God came into the promised land, they settled in the hill country, and they took the Ark of the Covenant and they placed it in the hill country, and they placed it under the tent of meeting. Then they knew that God was always close to them. One of the towns in the hill country was called Ramah. The people who settled in Ramah were those who wanted to be close to God and wanted to be close to the Ark of the Covenant and the tent of meeting. 2 of those people were called Elkanah and Hannah. Hannah longed to be a mother. She longed so much her whole body ached with longing. And so Hannah and Elkanah went to the shrine in Shiloh, where the tent of meeting covered the Ark of the Covenant. And Hannah prayed and prayed and prayed. She prayed so much that the priest there, whose name was Eli, was worried about her. And Eli came to her and found that what he'd been worried about was simply a person wanting and longing for something so deeply it made their whole body shake with longing. So Eli helped Hannah pray, and Hannah and Elkanah went back to Ramah, back to their home. Hannah and Elkanah did have a child, and that child's name was Samuel. And when Samuel was a little bit more than a tiny boy, Elkanah and Hannah came back to Eli with thankful hearts, and they handed over Samuel to Eli so that Samuel could help with the work of the Ark of the Covenant and the worship there. And then Hannah and Elkanah went back to their home in Ramah. Every year, Hannah would bring Samuel some new clothes because he was growing and growing, as children do. One night, Eli and Samuel were both lying down to sleep. And a voice came to Samuel, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel woke up and came to Eli and said, "You called me." And Eli said, "I didn't call you." And the voice came again to Samuel and said, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel got up and came to Eli and said, "You called me." And Eli said, "I didn't call you." And a third time a voice came and said, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel got up and came to Eli and said, "You called me." And Eli said, "I didn't call you." If the voice comes again, this is what you must say: "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears you." And the voice did come a fourth time and said, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel got up and said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears you." And the voice of God spoke to Samuel. And Samuel came to Eli and said, "And we will lose the Ark of the Covenant, and the tent of meeting will be destroyed, and your sons will die. And when you hear the news, you will lie down and die also." And Eli said, "The Lord has spoken." And when Samuel had experienced the loss of Eli and the loss of the ark, he went back to Ramah, to his home. Now, I wonder what part of this story you like the best. I wonder what part of this story is the most important part. I wonder what part of this story is really about you. I wonder what it's like to realize that God has been calling you several times, but you haven't realized that God could call someone like you. I wonder what it's like when you realize you have something to say which is going to be very hard for somebody else to hear. I wonder what it's like to tell somebody the truth and find that the truth comes to pass. I'd like to invite you now to wonder about this story. And you're welcome to put a line in the chat or to raise your hand, and I'll try to find you. I wonder what it's like to find that God has asked us to do things that we don't feel equipped for.
We have some in the chat. I wonder why Samuel thought it was Eli speaking, says Anderson.
I wonder if you've ever mistaken who was speaking to you.
Andrew.
Go on.
Andrew, would you like to unmute?
When you pray, why do you always ask God for something? I never have. So when your lady asks for a child, she asks God for it. I never have asked God for anything. Should I?
I wonder if prayer is asking God for things.
Helen, I wonder if Hannah's longing was put there by God. John, I wonder how you hear God over the other voices. Naomi, I wonder if Samuel was tempted to soften God's message and make it less devastating for Eli. Celia, I like the way God asked him as a boy, and he wouldn't have expected that, and how God might ask us to do things we don't feel equipped for. Martha, I wonder how I can know that it is God speaking and not my sinful heart. And a lot came together. I wonder how Samuel felt being uprooted from his home as a young age and going to live with Eli. I wonder how Hannah found it, having her heart's desire and then willingly giving Samuel back to God. John, I wonder how significant it is that God called Samuel at night, out of darkness. Is it God or is it my ego? How do I find the difference? I like the fact that Samuel genuinely heard a voice, God's, and that Eli was honest enough to realize this and instruct the young man to respond accordingly. It meant we shouldn't treat our calling alone, but seek wise advice too. I wonder if often my prayer is God's small voice speaking to me through my prayer and allowing me to say what I struggle to say. Eli knew deep within, hence his willingness to instruct Samuel. I wonder how Hannah felt when Samuel came back. I wonder if it would be good to tell the story again with more description of the visuals going on. My apologies, I don't think I made it clear to Sam that we had people here today who were visually impaired, and so there were gaps in what you were able to perceive of what was going on. I wonder if Samuel was awakening his realization of his complete dependence on God in answering his call. I wonder how Eli had the grace to accept Samuel's message so easily.
I wonder if there's any part of this story we could take away and still have all the story we need.
I wonder how they felt about giving Samuel away. This reminds me of Fiona's talk of taking from the edge to the center and returning. I wonder how Eli felt being told by a boy. I wonder if Hannah's trouble to conceive was due to disability, for example, endometriosis. I wonder how Samuel felt at being left with Eli, rather than living with his parents.
I wonder if it was this experience of losing the Ark of the Covenant that made Israel feel that they needed to build a temple. And I wonder whether the tent of meeting represented the character of God better or less well than the big and glorious temple.
I wonder if the story could have worked with Samuel living with his parents but being with Eli during the day. I wonder how Samuel felt when he realized it was God's voice. I wonder what status had to do with having a child. I wonder how they didn't panic and feel anxious, the power of God at work. I wonder how Samuel retold the story when he got home. I wonder how we retell our insights and stories. Maybe nighttime was the only quiet period for Samuel, if he had tasks all day at the temple.
I wonder if Samuel slept after the third time that he came to Eli, and Eli said, "This is God's voice and not mine. So next time you have to ask God to speak." I wonder if Samuel actually nodded off that third time.
I wonder if we listen when we cannot sleep. I wonder at the lack of anger in the story, the silent acceptance. I wonder how Samuel was able to overcome his fear. All these wonderings about Samuel living with Eli is making me wonder about deaf children in residential school, where they discover BSL and a community in more depth than if they had been day pupils. I wonder how different the story would have been if Samuel had been born a girl.
I wonder what would have happened if Eli had been angry with Samuel for telling him bad news.
I wonder if we are silent enough to hear the voice of God. I wonder about the intermingling of grief and joy. I wonder how Samuel is affected by being left by his parents at such a young age. I wonder, whoa, lots at the same time. I wonder how many of us might be hearing God, but having been told it's impossible. I wonder if Samuel should obey God and tell Eli. The way Eli reacted to Samuel is evidence that Eli used to have that spoken interaction with God at one time. I wonder if God tried to speak to Samuel just in one night or over several. I love that the story starts with Hannah, and that her calling is very different from Samuel's, but that none of it could have happened without her behind-the-scenes role. What if Samuel had been disabled? Would he have been accepted as a precious gift? I wonder how I can speak truth to power with Samuel's confidence.
I think Darius has his hand raised.
Because I give my response, just to say I'm using a talker to help me speak. I wonder if Samuel had a disability of any kind.
I wonder, we deafies hear God in various ways. We actually get prodding via thoughts implanted within us. With our modern knowledge of attachment, I wonder how traumatized Samuel and his parents would have been at this enforced separation, and what it says about the rights of a child both then and now. I wonder how it relates to more modern taking of children, like Indigenous children in residential homes.
I'm going to put the story away now. And as I put the story away, I'm going to reflect with you and with God on the different parts of the story. Going to reflect on Hannah and her call, and the way without Hannah there would have been no story. And the clothes that Hannah brought, and the ways we seek to stay close to those who feel far away from us. And the beds that Eli and the young Samuel slept on, and the ways God speaks to us at night. And Ramah, the home we go to when all else has fallen apart. And Eli, who was able to hear the most terrible news without blaming the messenger. And Elkanah, who wanted the best for his wife and wanted the best for his son, however that best affected him. And the tent and the fragile places that God inhabits. And the ark and the ways we know that God is present with us. And Samuel, who for a long time didn't realize that God was speaking to him and assumed that God only spoke to other people. And the whole story, we pray that we may discover how this precious story is our story. Amen.
Thank you, Sam, for a lovely session. You've opened our minds to wanderings together today. I'm sorry again to those who are visually impaired that I didn't do a good brief on that. Thank you to Lucy for putting text in the chat as the story was put away. Sam, thank you for giving us part of your day off to be part of our conference for the 10th time. We know that the conference is important to you because you're with us again. Thank you.